Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down the big stories behind the headlines. Today, we're looking at the life, the influence, and the violent death of one of America's most polarizing figures, Charlie Kirk. Let's start with this quote from former President Donald Trump. It really tells you so much about the kind of influence Charlie Kirk had. He was the conservative activist fatally shot this week at just 31 years old, and this quote, it hints at a relationship that truly shaped a political movement.
So here's what we're going to cover in this explainer. We'll track his incredibly rapid rise, see how he built a massive youth movement for MAGA, dig into the controversies that really defined him, and then try to understand his violent death within a deeply troubling pattern.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. How exactly did Charlie Kirk go from being a teenage activist to one of the most prominent and powerful conservative figures in the entire country? Well, it all really started with this. Turning Point USA. He co-founded this thing when he was just 18 years old, and the mission was crystal clear. Get young conservatives fired up and ready to fight what he saw as leftist ideology taking over American campuses. But here's the thing. Turning Point didn't stay some small campus club for long. Not at all. And to really get how it turned into this political powerhouse, you've got to follow the money.
So in its very first year, Turning Point USA started out with just under $80,000. Now, that's a respectable start for sure, but it was only the beginning. Because if you fast forward to 2024, that number just skyrocketed. We're talking nearly $85 million in annual revenue. It became a true fundraising juggernaut. And all that cash, it wasn't just sitting in a bank. It fueled a massive ground game, building chapters on over 3,300 high school and college campuses. It became a real grassroots political force. And this level of success, well, it got him noticed in the highest circles. We're talking the Trump White House. The president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, even said that Kirk's ability to over-deliver made him a go-to guy, often chosen over much more established groups. But, that same aggressive, pugnacious style that made him so effective, it was also what landed him right in the middle of some huge controversies driven by his absolute loyalty to Donald Trump. You really saw this play out after the 2020 election. He went all in on promoting the false claims that it was stolen, and that role ended up bringing a whole lot of legal scrutiny his way. And look, that was far from a one-off thing. Over the years, he made all these provocative statements on race, public health, politics, you name it. And yeah, they drew a ton of widespread criticism, but for his base, for the MAGA movement, it just seemed to solidify his appeal. He was a real lightning rod in the culture wars.
And that brings us to the shooting in Utah. The state's governor called it a political assassination, and it's just the latest and maybe most shocking chapter in a really troubling trend in America.
Yeah, Kirk's death, as tragic as it is, it's not happening in a vacuum. I mean, just look at this timeline. It shows this horrifying escalating pattern of political violence targeting figures from all across the spectrum.
In the hours right after his death, the reactions started flooding in, and man, they were a perfect snapshot of just how deeply divided this country really is. So on one side, you had people like California Governor Gavin Newsom. He and Kirk were political opponents, for sure, but he came out right away and condemned the violence, no questions asked. And then on the other side, you had Republicans like Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who mourned him as this conservative icon, a beacon for young people, calling his death an irreplaceable loss. But any calls for unity? They didn't last long. Pretty quickly, you had others jumping in to assign blame. Elon Musk and President Trump both pointing fingers directly at their political opponents, even though the shooter's identity and motive weren't even clear yet. And then President Trump took it a step further. He actually framed Kirk's death as a martyrdom for the conservative cause. A move that, really feels like it's just digging those political battle lines even deeper in an already fractured nation. So you look at his life, and it was just defined by political combat. But his death, it leaves all of us with this really urgent and honestly unsettling question. In an era where political violence is on the rise, how do we even begin to debate our differences safely?